All right, so here's the syllabus. We'll go through this fairly quickly because I am reasonably confident you all are capable of reading. I'm Dr. Hartman. My office is in Neskin Hall 211, so that's caddy corner over here. My office hours are going to be Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 10 to 11, Tuesday, Thursday, 8:30 to noon. I will also be participating in the Eta Kappa Nu free circuits tutoring, but I have not yet met with the officers of that organization to figure out when that's going to be. Typically speaking, we offer free circuits tutoring about twice a week. It does not matter what section of circuits you're in, or really what class that you're dealing with circuits in. We will help if you come by and ask for help. Okay. So I have 10 office hours and then also probably 3 hours a week of free tutoring. And then if you can catch me when I'm not doing something else and need help with something, just ask. My email address is my last name at latech.edu. My office phone number is given here. You are a fool if you try to call it, because except for my office hours and even some of those, I'm usually somewhere in Neskin Hall doing something. All right, so emergency class disruption policy in the event of another global pandemic or hurricane or something like that. The class will continue over Moodle and Zoom. I already have the Zoom thing set up. If you need to use it for whatever reason, like you're ill or you don't feel like putting on pants today or whatever, it's right here in the middle when you go to the introduction section. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the attendance policy in a moment. Let's see, the course objectives for this class is to effectively take everything that you guys learned in Engineering 120, cover it in like 3 days, and then expand on all of that kind of stuff a lot and learn how to really analyze circuits. We are going to set a pretty fast pace for this course. There are 24 lectures of different material. It is a lot of stuff, so I have already uploaded the exam review materials for all 3 exams in this class to the course's Moodle page. That currently consists of about 3 old exams. Depending on my mental health and time, I might put up some more old exams and all that kind of good stuff, but I figure that starting you guys with 3 to study from is at least a good starting point. The textbook and reading material for this class is officially Engineering Circuit Analysis 10th edition by Height, Kemmerly, Phillips, and Durbin. And I give you all the information there. Don't buy the book. That's a terrible idea. For 2 reasons. A, I'm recording all of my lectures and all that kind of stuff, so you'll have access to that for free, just on good old Moodle and YouTube and all that kind of jazz. And secondly, if you pop on Google and you Google CADULABY and click the first link, this is a circuit textbook by Dr. Fawaz T. Ulabi and a couple of others. He is a professor emeritus at the University of Michigan, a very, very prestigious electrical engineering school. And he and some friends wrote a textbook and decided to distribute it for free to students as a PDF copy. So you can get this textbook, pay 0 money. It has pretty much the exact same information as any circuits textbook is going to contain. Does some things better than the textbook that's officially for this class, does a few things a little bit worse. All textbooks have their pros and cons, but this one you can get free and feel no even tinge of guilt for stealing someone's intellectual property, because I know nobody's going to buy a textbook anyway. They're just going to find a free PDF copy. This guy's giving it away, so use this opportunity. Yeah. All right, so that's the textbook stuff. Disability disclosure. So students needing testing or classroom accommodation should reach out to Testing and Disability Services as soon as possible. I believe some of you have already done that. I'm going to go on lots of little mini rants today and pretty much every day. For those of you that have had me before, you're well aware of this. If you have a diagnosed learning disability, or you think you might have a learning disability or something like that, go get it diagnosed. Do not take exam 1 in a room with 150 students all shuffling around in their chairs, coughing, sneezing, making noises, etc., when you have the opportunity to take the exam in a quiet place, pretty much by yourself or with maybe 5 to 10 other students, and have extended time. Don't think, I'll see how this goes, and then if I need it, I'll utilize it. No, if you have a diagnose learning disability, take the opportunity that is presented to you. Don't fail a test to see whether or not you need it. Take the opportunity. That's my rant for that. Let's see, class attendance. So the class will adhere to University Policy 2206, and then I give you a link. I don't expect anybody to actually read that. Effectively, what that policy says is that for a class that meets 3 times a week, you're allowed to miss 3 days or whatever before I can do anything mean. Generally speaking, I'm not going to do anything mean anyway. I get paid to teach this class regardless of how many of you guys show up. I do understand that it's at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I also do understand that sometimes it's just really hard to put on pants. So that's why the Zoom thing is up there. Also for people that get sick. One thing that I do want to say though, is if you're not physically here, you're not attending class, meaning I'm not going to go and look on Zoom to see who's sitting in Zoom or whatever. If you're here, you're here. If you're on Zoom, you're absent, but you're still participating. I don't use that attendance for anything. I'm just required to take it. So that is my policy there. The actual attendance / participation grade portion of this course is going to come from the in-class assignments, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Those can be submitted digitally. Actually, they can only be submitted digitally. Don't give me paper, I will lose it. So we'll talk about that in a minute. So that's where any grade is going to come from, attendance and participation type stuff. Okay. All right. Academic honor code thing. Being a student of higher standards, I pledge to embody the principles of academic integrity. That'll be on your tests. You'll sign it, all that kind of stuff, boilerplate. Academic misconduct in general is covered in the larger academic honor code policy with the link located here. Got a little bit about behavior. Don't beat me or anyone else up either in the classroom or in the parking lot. Try to swear less than I do and we'll be okay. With regards to cheating, don't do it. It pisses me off and I will absolutely bring you up before the honor council. All right, homework. Homework is going to be on web work. I'm sorry. I know it's awful, but it is what it is because I don't have the mental bandwidth or the desire to grade paper assignments for 47 of you guys and never will. You are going to be granted unlimited attempts per problem. Dr. Swanbaum is usually the person that sets up the web work. So what I mean by that is he's usually the one that makes the decision on when the due dates are. And he is a fan of using, I'm trying to remember what it's called, but it's like a reduced grading thing. So effectively there's a due date. And then beyond that due date for some number of days, you can still work on the homework for 50% credit or something like that. And then there's a hard cutoff of 0 credit. Once I talk to him and figure out what he's done, I'll give you more information about the web work, but expect something. Let's see, the first homework assignment should be assigned on Monday's class, so I might figure that stuff out over the weekend. All right, in-class assignments. So after every lecture, except for today's, I will distribute a brief problem set. That's actually not quite true. It's going to be put up on Moodle so that I don't have to kill more trees than necessary, and then you guys can print or whatever. But you'll have a brief set of problems, typically somewhere in the ballpark of 1 to 3 problems that are going to be about what we covered in class that day. Okay. So I'm going to say this now. I'm sure I'm going to have to say it at least 5 other times throughout the quarter. These assignments are not graded for completeness or correctness. Okay. They are literally just, they serve 2 purposes. A, it's supposed to be a low stakes way for you to start working on some problems that are related to your homework assignments, where I'm seeing whether or not you synthesized what we talked about in class that day. Okay. So I'm going to talk about stuff. I'm going to give you a set. You're going to try to work on them. Some things are not going to click. And so you're expected to ask questions so that we can figure things out. And again, you're not graded on completeness or correctness. So whatever you get done, gets done, and that's good enough for me. Another reason that I like to do the in-class assignments is because nobody, including myself, wants to hear me talk about circuits for 2 hours straight. Okay. So generally speaking, my lectures will last somewhere between 45 minutes to an hour. A couple will go longer. So there should usually be a solid 30 to 45 minutes to work on the in-class assignment. And it's just kind of a pre-homework to figure out what you didn't catch while we were actually having the class. All right. Mini labs. So we're going to have 8 mini labs in this class. Each mini lab is to be completed by in groups of 2 to 3 students. So there is an expectation for you guys to go down the hall to the project-based learning office and buy a kit. The kit costs $10. Not everybody needs a kit. Literally 1 person per group. So pick the person you think is least likely to drop the class and have them buy the kit, or go in $250 a piece for 4 of you or whatever and buy a kit, whatever you want to do. But not everybody needs a kit. I just want to be clear about that. So distribute the cost among yourselves however you see fit. If you've taken the class before, there's a possibility you already have the kit. It did not change. It's just components, breadboards, a couple of things that we're going to use for these mini lab assignments. It would be best for you to go get these kits, I believe, today. Before we're going to have our first mini lab will be on Monday. And I know that the project-based learning office is going to be absolute wreck once all the freshmen have to go get their kits and stuff. So getting it sooner rather than later is a good idea, or you're going to piss Miss Ashley off, and that's a terrible idea. All right. Let's see. Exams. Oh, actually, let me say something else here about the mini labs. You're going to need to bring a digital multimeter. I have a bin full of them, and roughly 80% of them have a blown fuse, which means you can't measure current with them. So if you're relying on my multimeters, and it's an experiment that involves current measurement in any way, expect to be here for an exceptionally long time, literally just switching multimeters out until you find one that has a working fuse, because I am far too lazy to go through and test and replace all of the fuses. Or bring your own multimeter that you hopefully have taken care of, hopefully still has a fuse intact and all that kind of stuff, and your life will be easier. All of the dates for the mini labs and things like that are on the syllabus on the next page or something like that when we get to the tentative course schedule. All right, 3 exams given during the class. All exams are closed book and closed notes. Typically speaking, I get talked into giving you guys an equation sheet for exam 3. That is the only exam that you will receive an equation sheet for, even possibly. So definitely not one for exam 1. Definitely not one for exam 2. I'm expecting you to learn the equations and relationships between the quantities and all that kind of good stuff. Only FE approved calculators are permitted for usage during the exams. A list of the FE approved calculators can be found at that link. And then I brought some calculators that I like. So how many of you have a TI-30?
6.
So 36, great. TI-30 is a peasant calculator. Step your game up. Okay. The reason why I say that is because we are going to be solving system of equations using our calculator. I think the TI-30 can do that, but we're also going to be doing a lot of math that involves the use of complex numbers later on in this course. And while the TI-30 is capable of it, it isn't particularly good at it. Whereas the TI-36X can easily handle complex numbers in both polar and rectangular format. The Casio 115 is also a good calculator to use. And then the Casio 991 is arguably a better calculator to use. Yes? No. So the only Casios that you can use are the 115 and the 991. The only PIs that are allowed, according to the NCEES, which is the organization that does the fundamentals of engineering exam, would be the TI-30, the TI-36, and then there are 2 HP calculators, but I don't believe in their witchcraft, so I never bothered to buy any of those. Yeah. So if you are only going to get one new calculator for this class, I would suggest getting the Casio 991. The reason why is that this particular calculator is the only NCEES approved calculator that is capable of solving a system of equations that has 4 equations and 4 unknown quantities, which means that you will be able to analyze some of the circuits without having to do an extra simplification step that your peers that have a calculator that can only do a 3x3 system can do. There isn't going to be a single problem on an exam that will require you to be able to do a 4x4 system. But this calculator is capable of it, so it can make your life very slightly easier in specific instances. Now, if you are balling out of control, as it were, I would suggest that you purchase two calculators. One of them being a Casio 991, which is great for the first half of the class, and the other one being a TI 36X. I prefer this particular calculator for any math involving complex numbers because you don't have to change the mode on your calculator, and all of the ability to store variables and things like that are a little bit easier for this calculator. And once we get to dealing with complex numbers, learning how to store things in your calculator's memory is going to make your life wildly easier than writing down and doing all the bookkeeping and stuff that complex numbers entails. So the 991 is capable of doing all of the complex math in this class, but the TI 36X is a little bit better. I am an absolute nerd, and I have like 2 of these, I think 4 of these, and 3 of these. So not trying to put anybody on blast or anything, but if you can't afford a calculator, let me know, and I'm happy to let you borrow one of mine. Just come let me know outside of class or something like that. All right, should be fairly obvious, but all exams have a no cell phone policy. So if I see or hear your cell phone, you get a 0. All right, here is the weighting of grades. So homework is 15%. The in-class assignments is 5%. The mini labs are a total of 5%. And then exam 1, 2, and 3 are all worth 30%. The astute among you have added those numbers together and found that they come up to 115%, which is significantly more than 100%. The even more astute among you will have noticed this little footnote that says, the weight of the exam on which you receive your lowest score will be reduced to 15%. I set things up this way so that you can have 1 bad test day and it not tank your grade in this class. 2 bad test days, you're kind of hosed, okay? So if you're keeping up on your homework and you're doing your in-class assignments and your mini labs, it is possible to make an A in this class if you do everything else correctly and make a 34 on 1 exam, okay? It's highly unlikely that you will do perfectly on everything else if you made a 34 on 1 exam, but anyway.
You look at me like we've had this conversation.
Not you specifically, no. There are typically between 2 and 5 bonus points kind of buried in the exam as well. So it's usually out of 105 points. So there's a little bit of wiggle room there too, to kind of help things out. Because of this, I believe, lenient exam policy and the opportunity for bonuses on the exam, this course utilizes a firm 10-point scale where if you want to make an A in this class, you need to exceed 90.000. Okay. I don't curve or round up grades or anything like that. On the exams, sometimes you might see that your grade has changed. If that happens, it's because I made a mistake and threw problems out and gave everybody credit for a problem. It was not a curve. I am fundamentally opposed to curving exams and stuff like that. All right, so I don't believe any information on this syllabus is going to change, but if it needs to, I reserve the right to do so. I will let you know. Emergency notification system stuff is here. COVID-19 policy stuff is here. If I am such a raging jerk that you need counseling services, that information is here. And then we get to our tentative course schedule. So as I mentioned, on Monday, we will have our first mini lab, then we will have another one on Friday, then the following Monday, and then about 2.5 weeks off. So for this first stretch, you're gonna wanna bring a multimeter pretty much every day to class. Our first exam is gonna be Monday night, Monday, October the 2nd. It will be upstairs in the chemistry lecture hall. All of the sections will be meeting together at 6 p.m. If you have Extended time accommodations. I have the room reserved, but I don't remember what it is off the top of my head. Once I remember it, I'll put it on the board over here so that you all have ample notice of where your exams are going to be. But all of the exams are supposed to be in the same places because I reserved the rooms early this year. And then we just kind of have a general list of what we're going to be covering for the next 3 months. So, all right. I have talked for half an hour straight. Anybody have any questions about anything before I talk for another 45 minutes straight? Yes, ma'am. So the exams are 2 hours. They used to be 3 hours, and then I was told by the dean to stop being so mean. So, yeah. Yeah, so if you're a standard time student, the expectation is you'll get there at 6 and be finished before 8. Yep. Any other questions? All right. So let me close this out. One other thing I do want to mention, I've provided a link here for you guys to download MathCAD Prime 8.0. The username is MathCAD. The password is Bulldogs, where the 2 L's are replaced by 1s. Most of you have probably already downloaded this program because you used it in your Engineering 120 series. This is my preferred program for you guys to use to solve large systems of equations, which is going to happen pretty regularly in this class, especially after we learn nodal and mesh analysis. I am aware that you can solve system equations using matrix manipulation on Excel. I am far too lazy to do that. That's what MathCAD is for. I'm also aware that you can use Wolfram Alpha. I am too lazy to figure that out either. So if you need help solving system of equations, use MathCAD or find somebody more knowledgeable in your preferred thing. MathCAD is what I know, so that's why I put it up here for you guys to use. All right. Pretend you don't see how horrifyingly cluttered my desktop is. This is after me cleaning it up some this summer, so I do want to update this program. All right. No share, should have already been shared. Okay, so today we are going to cover something fairly simple and straightforward. We are going to be talking about basic circuits terminology. So we're just trying to make sure that everyone is speaking the same language. So we're going to start by looking at a generic circuit element. So I'm going to put a little terminal here. I'm going to call this element A and another terminal here. This generic circuit element is a 2-terminal circuit element, putting these little orange circles around the terminals. And it could represent any number of different circuit elements, like a resistor, capacitor, inductor, a battery, a current source, a diode. I think those are most of the 2-terminal circuit elements. I'm sure I'm forgetting several actually. The overwhelming majority of circuit elements that we're going to be dealing with in this class are 2-terminal elements. That being said, you guys already have some limited amount of experience with a 3-terminal element, the transistor, because you had to use transistors in your Engineering 120 series. By the time you finish with this class, you will have a limited amount of experience with an 8-terminal element, which is the operational amplifier. Okay? So these terminals are what allow us to connect other elements together, okay? So I'm going to add a second element here. Let's call it B. Like so. I'm going to connect those terminals together, and then I'm going to have another terminal out here, like so. And whenever I have two or more circuit elements connected together, I have formed an electrical network. Okay. So we are going to define a network to be an interconnection between two or more circuit elements what the heck is happening? And this point of interconnection between the circuit elements is what we are going to call a node. Like I forgot the word more here, so I'll tuck that in. All right. So if I add more elements, it is likely that I will wind up adding more nodes to our system. So let's say that we have a generic circuit element C here. Let's put a circuit element D out here. And I'm going to connect these together here. I'm going to connect things together along the bottom like so. So whenever we have multiple nodes present, like a network like this, it is usually going to be useful for us to identify and label our nodes. And this will be a critical part of what's called nodal analysis, a very powerful circuit analysis tool that we're going to learn in about 2 weeks. So how I like to identify my nodes is by using different colors. I start at one circuit element, so A in this case, and I'm just going to travel along this wire until I hit another circuit element. All points along that red path are part of a single node. We're going to go into a little bit more detail on why we treat all points along that path as a single node when we cover Ohm's law next Wednesday. So that could be one node. I'm going to start at element B, and I'm going to keep on trucking over here until I hit element D. Because there was a branching path off of this, I'm also going to include that. And so we have one node shared between elements B, C, and D. And then lastly, I have a node here on bottom that's shared between elements A, C, and D. Like so. So if we look at elements A and B, particularly what I'm talking about here is the red node. We have effectively one node that's shared in between these two elements that doesn't contain any branching paths. There's not anything else sticking off of it, okay? We consider this particular configuration to be a series connection. We are going to update our definition for a series connection after we talk about Kirchhoff's current law next Wednesday. But for now, let's just say that a series connection is a connection between two circuit elements with no additional branches. Additional branching paths. If we look at elements C and D, we can see that they share the blue node. So their top terminals are connected together. And they also share the green node. So their bottom terminals are connected together. We call this a parallel connection. What the heck? So in a parallel connection, we have a connection between two or more circuit elements where all terminals are shared. So how would we describe the connection between elements A and C? Is it a series connection? No, why not? Absolutely right. So there's a branching path off to element D. So that means A and C can't be in series. Are A and C in parallel? Exactly right. So element A is connected to the red node on top. Element C is connected to the blue node on top. So even though they share the green node, they don't share the other set of terminals. So they are not in parallel either. So elements A and C are not connected either in series or in parallel. That's perfectly okay. That's one of the things that I don't think the Engineering 120 series does a really good job of, is letting you know that it's okay that sometimes things aren't going to fall into those simple boxes. We are going to learn techniques that will allow us to simplify circuits and make things look like they're in a series connection or a parallel connection. We'll get to that really next week, but for now, we're just going to leave things as they are, right? It's okay that it's not a series connection or a parallel connection. All right, so I'm going to come back to this page on my notes, but I want us to work an example problem first, so I'm going to switch over here. So I want us to consider the following network. So we have a generic circuit element A. Here is a generic circuit element B. Down here is a generic circuit element C. Here's D. Here's E. Diagonally across here will be F. Here's G. Here is H. So I want us to answer the following questions. And actually, I'm going to help myself out here in a moment. Copy this so I can reuse it when we work another example problem in a moment. All right, so the first question that I want to ask you guys is how many, that is not how you spell how, nodes Does this network contain? The second question is which elements are connected in series? And the third is which elements are connected in parallel? All right, so let's start with the first question. How many nodes do you guys think we have here? 5. Okay. I tend to agree with that, so I'm going to go through and identify them. So I'm going to start with this node connecting elements A and B in the top left corner. Then we have this node connecting elements B, E, and D in the kind of left middle. We have this node connecting E, F, G, and H in the top right. We have this node connecting A and C in the bottom left. And we have this node connecting C, D, F, G, and H on the bottom right. So let's count them up here. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 nodes. 5 nodes was absolutely correct. Any questions on identifying those nodes or anything like that? Hopefully fairly. So now, according to the definition of a series connection that I just gave you guys 5-ish minutes ago, which elements are connected in series? What was that? So based on our current definition, I would say that A and B are in series and A and C are in series. Once we learn Kirchhoff's current law, then I would say A, B, and C are in series. So A and B, and you're too damn smart, Jacob. A and C. I'll change you.
Okay.
You're a Mechie who's into robotics, which is enough electrical for me. All right. All right, so the last question here, which elements, if any, are connected in parallel? Somebody who hasn't taken this class before. F, G, and H, absolutely right, Walker. So all 3 of those elements share the green node on top, and all 3 of those elements share the pink node on bottom, so they are all in parallel. Are there any other parallel connections? So if we were able to combine these things, then yes, that combination would be in parallel with D. But because we're dealing with generic circuit elements where we don't know if they're resistors, voltage sources, capacitors, inductors, or some combination thereof, we really don't have any means by which to do any combination yet. Yeah, so your line of thinking there is correct. If there was a way to combine all of those into a single equivalent component, which we're going to be doing a whole heck of a lot of in this class, that combination would indeed be in parallel D. All right, so any questions about identifying nodes, identifying series connections, or identifying parallel connections? Should be straightforward, should also very much be a review of what you've done previously. That's kind of the point of today, but that'll be okay. All right, so I'm going to switch back to that previous page. And what I'm going to do now really quickly is I'm going to uncolor these nodes because we're going to be talking about loops and meshes. And loops and meshes don't really have a lot to do with nodes. All right. So we are going to define a circuit to be any network that contains at least one closed path. So is this network containing elements A, B, C, and D a circuit? Absolutely. It contains multiple closed paths, right? What I mean by a closed path is that if I start at one node point and go through circuit elements, can I get back to my original node point? Okay? And I can easily do that in, I believe, 3 different ways here. So we'll now define a loop to be any closed combination of circuit elements and nodes. So how many loops do you guys believe this circuit element, or excuse me, this circuit contains? 3. Absolutely right. So some of you may be thinking to yourself that there are 2. We'll talk about why there's 3. If we started at the bottom left-hand node, like so, we would have this path, loop. We could also go around the perimeter of the circuit. So that's another way to start at that bottom left-hand node and end at that bottom left-hand node. And then we could also start at this bottom middle and go around like so. So we have those 3 different loops, 3 different closed paths that allow us to go from one point and return back to that same point. And obviously we could go in the opposite direction, but that would still represent the exact same loop. Okay. Now we are going to define a mesh. Okay. And a mesh is just a special case of a loop. So a mesh is going to be defined as any loops in a circuit which do not contain a smaller loop. So how many meshes does this circuit contain? 2, right? So that red loop would be considered a mesh. That green loop would be considered a mesh, but the blue loop would not be considered a mesh because it contains those 2 smaller loops. Right? So being able to correctly identify meshes is the starting part of what's called mesh analysis. Another very powerful circuit analysis technique that we are going to learn the day after we learn nodal analysis. So still in the ballpark of 2 weeks away. All right, so the last thing that I want to do now is go back to our original circuit diagram here. I'm going to paste the copy that I made so that I don't have to erase all that stuff. And we're going to answer a few questions regarding loops and meshes for this, and then we are done for the day. So let's call this D. How many meshes does this circuit contain? And then E will be how many loops does this circuit contain? We're going to identify our meshes first because it's generally easier to identify the larger loops in terms of the meshes, okay? So how many meshes do you guys think we have? 4. Okay, I agree with that. So we have this mesh around the leftmost square path. We have this mesh around this left triangular path. We have this mesh around the right triangular path. And then we have this mesh around the right square path, right? So that looks like 4 meshes. So now let's talk about how many loops the circuit contains. So let's break things down a little bit. Okay? So how many one mesh loops are there? 4, absolutely right. Because all of those meshes are loops, okay? So we have 4 one mesh loops. How many two mesh loops do we have? I agree with that as well. So I'm going to label things here. I'm going to call this mesh 1, 2, 3, and 4. So our 2 mesh loops would be 1 and 2 together, 2 and 3 together, and 3 and 4 together. We can't combine of meshes without including another mesh and forming a larger loop. Okay. How many 3 mesh loops do we have? Just 2, right? So we would have one that contains 1, 2, and 3, and we'd have another that contains 2, 3, and 4. So just so that it's obvious, 1 would be this guy, and another, the other. We'll do this. And then lastly, how many 4 mesh loops do we have? 1, just around the perimeter of the circuit, right? So that would be this guy right here. All right, so that I ever ask you how many loops are in a circuit, because that really doesn't contain a lot of useful information that we're going to apply. How many meshes are in a circuit? Absolutely. Being able to identify them, like I said, is fundamental to the concept of mesh analysis. All right, so I have thrown a lot of jargon at you, given you definitions and all that kind of stuff. We get out of here for the day. Yes, sir. Sure. So a mesh is defined to be any loops in a circuit that do not contain any smaller loops. All right. Have a great weekend. Hope classes are starting off well and all that kind of good stuff. And I will